You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
All right, folks, welcome back to Crimson Cast. Scott here with you, excited to do a preview for a Notre Dame game. Dude, we're like 72 hours away from the college football playoff. It's awesome. Before we get to Tyler, just a quick shout out to two of our friends and sponsors. We have Homefield Apparel. Check them out. They have college football apparel gear for Indiana. They have Notre Dame gear, but why would you buy that when you could buy Indiana gear? Use a promo code HOME23 to get 23% off to get 15% off your first purchase. Or mess it up. Throw in whatever promo code you want. Maybe you'll get whatever discount code you want. Who knows? And also our friends over at Upland Brewery, who have the Hoosier Game Day Lager in the iconic crimson and cream can. They don't sell it at Notre Dame Stadium, but you can buy some wherever Upland is sold and bring it to the stadium, the tailgate. You got an 8 o'clock game, tons of time to tailgate. And as always, Upland reminds you to enjoy and drink responsibly. So we are joined today, as I unmute him, and I have all my mics working this time. We are joined today by Tyler James of Inside Notre Dame Sports. Tyler, man, thanks for joining. Good to talk to you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
We're very excited. I'm just going to start here. Like, obviously, this is a place Indiana has never been. I'm curious, how are Notre Dame fans? I mean, it's obviously exciting to be in the college football playoff, but what is the feeling for Notre Dame fans? A little more like been there, done that, or as fired up as maybe, Indiana fans are?
I would say more the latter, and I think this in part because Notre Dame's hosting a playoff game. Like, Notre Dame's never done that before. I mean, no one's never done that. Notre Dame will be the first one to do that in this 12-team playoff, just based on the way that the game schedule worked out. So Notre Dame fans are excited about the way the season has gone since that loss to Northern Illinois. Many people didn't think the season would end up where it is now at that moment, but this team has really galvanized, and the fan base has sort of embrace them, and I think they're really fired up about the game. I think the fact that it is Indiana and that there's plenty of Indiana basketball fans and Notre Dame football fans, and everyone knows Indiana fans, and there's Indiana fans trying to get in the stadium. So I think that's my expectation is that that's making Notre Dame fans even more excited for this game and wanting to make sure that Notre Dame puts its best foot forward.
Yeah. How is you heard this. We've heard the stories of, Georgia I don't want to say taking over, but Georgia having a big presence in Notre Dame Stadium, Ohio State having a presence. From my perspective, all the people I know are going to the game. Like, a lot of Indiana fans are going to the game. It sounds like everyone I know is going. I know we're not going to take over the stadium, but how has the feeling been within the Notre Dame fan base? Are you seeing a lot of, interest from Indiana fans? Like, it's unique because it's not that far away from Bloomington, and we don't have a lot of experience playing there, but I'm curious if you're seeing, a feeling at this point. Are Notre Dame fans worried about Indiana fans coming in too high a number?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a natural worry that's somewhat deserved based on past experiences. Although I think as of late, particularly when you think about like the Ohio State game last season, that wasn't as lopsided as maybe some of the other fan bases that have been able to get into the stadium. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. There's the tickets, the Notre Dame tickets, which accounts for the vast majority of tickets, never made public sale. They were all given out and obviously purchased through their season ticket holders and a lottery system that Notre Dame has for donors to its university. And so it's up to those people who got those tickets and whether they're willing to sell them or they have Indiana fan friends that they want to allow to come to the game. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. I think what we've learned in the past is like red stands out. Like, yes, there looks like a lot of red in the crowd, and Notre Dame fans don't necessarily always wear the same color. So that doesn't necessarily help. But I imagine, especially on Friday with it being so cold, a lot of people are going to be bundled up. So I don't know if you're going to know who's a fan of who, unless you can tell by the flag or the towel they're waving, because both teams are bringing towels to the game, it sounds like. So that'll be interesting to see what it looks like in the stadium.
Yeah, I love the dueling towels. That's fantastic. I'll ask you this, from an Indiana perspective, when we saw the draw, and I've been saying this, to a lot of people have been saying on this podcast, it's no knock on the teams because all teams are good at this point. But I was, of all the options there and all the places we could play and the teams we could play, I thought this was a pretty favorable draw for Indiana, as opposed to when, the week before we're playing Georgia. And not to compare, but like that, playing
Right.
Georgia in Georgia didn't feel like it was going to be an awesome time for Indiana.
Yeah.
This feels like a pretty good draw. From Notre Dame's perspective, you've also been in the college football playoff discussion this entire time as well, seeing your spots here and there. What was your perspective and the fans' perspective from Notre Dame on, what do you think of the draw of Indiana? And then kind of what was your view of like, were there draws that you kind of liked, didn't like, and how you thought it all played out from a Notre Dame perspective on the way the bracket looks?
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame fans and writers like myself thought that Notre Dame had a chance to get the 5 seed at some point. The way the conference championship weekend played out sort of made that unlikely. And so it wasn't that surprising that Texas and Penn State stayed ahead of Notre Dame in the rankings, which pushed Notre Dame down to the 7th seed. The thought was always like that 5 seed might be the best path, but I'm not sure it necessarily is the way things played out. I think the 6th seed Penn State got probably the most favorable path. And so there's been a conversation for weeks now amongst Notre Dame fans is like, hey, shouldn't we be ahead of Penn State in the rankings? That obviously never happened. And I think Penn State sort of solidified that with playing tough against Oregon in the championship game. So I understand how it sort of played out that way. But yeah, Indiana, I think there's some similarities between these two teams, Indiana and Notre Dame, that make it an interesting matchup. I think Indiana's offense is more reliant on its passing game, whereas Notre Dame's offense is more reliant on its running game. But both teams have good defenses and don't turn the ball over very much, sort of limit their mistakes and sort of count on you to sort of mess up as the opponent. So it's an interesting matchup in that sense. I think I don't think it's the worst matchup for Notre Dame by any stretch, especially this time of year. Like, I think that's what we're all like, well, how good can IU's passing game be if it's cold and snowing? Obviously, it was perfectly fine against Purdue, but we all know that Purdue sucks. So weather doesn't matter what the weather is. Everyone's going to do that to Purdue because Notre Dame did the same. So yeah, I think it's a good matchup. I wouldn't be shocked if Indiana won this game. It's going to have to be a game script that follows like Indiana's strengths and Notre Dame and Indiana sort of shutting down Notre Dame's strengths. But I think we'll see how it plays out. Notre Dame's played against some teams, and it feels like an insult to compare Indiana to Navy and Army, but those were teams that people were questioning, well, how good are they based on their schedule? And then in those games, Notre Dame just blew the doors off them. And I think Indiana's probably better than those teams. But those teams made some mistakes, which allowed those games to be blowouts. And I think Indiana made some mistakes against Ohio State that led to that. And we'll see sort of how Indiana handles the adversity of playing in a potentially hostile environment, which it didn't handle well at Ohio State.
Yeah, no, it's true. What's so fun in this matchup is we've been saying this. It almost feels like at times Notre Dame is not part of Indiana. I mean, I know it's in South Bend, I know it's in Indiana, but Notre Dame almost is like a level above college football. It just is. It is what it is. And the national media is starting to figure out like, hey, this is the Battle of Indiana. But it's odd because there really is, outside of the reversible jacket fan of the Notre Dame football, Indiana basketball, which I don't know about you. I've never been a fan of that person. I don't know about your case. Like, I'm just like, pick one. Like, be a Notre Dame basketball fan or an Indiana football fan. Like, stay with it all the way through. There's really not a lot of connection here between Indiana and Notre Dame. Like, I'm very curious to see what the atmosphere is like, because I'm assuming Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of hatred toward Indiana. It's just kind of like, wow, this is cute. Like, you guys are a football team also in Indiana. And from our perspective, we've gotten curb stomped year after year by Michigan, Ohio State, so if we can take down a Michigan, there's something there. Obviously, winning the game would be huge for Indiana, but it's odd. I mean, they've only played a couple of times for programs that are so close, and for a Notre Dame team that kind of plays Big Ten geographical teams like Purdue, Michigan, Michigan State. It is just really interesting how there's not a lot of history here, and it almost feels like, I went to the Rose Bowl this year. We played UCLA. It was kind of like the other fans were like, hey, I don't really know you, and you don't know. We have no history there. I find that interesting, and I wonder what the atmosphere is going to be like based on the fact that it's almost like the first time we've ever played each other, even though it's not.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame fans have a pretty good reputation of being a pretty welcoming fan base. Like, they're not here to like throw stuff at you. Like, that's not the kind of fan base that Notre Dame is inside the stadium.
So you're not Ohio State, is what you're saying,
right? Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of scowling. Like, I think my guess would be it might be dictated on how IU fans are acting. Like, if they're acting fools and wanting to start stuff, I think Notre Dame fans might get a little more intense as a result of that. But I think they'll be welcoming. I think there's a little added to it with this being a playoff game, and people may be upset, like, hey, how did you get in here as an Indiana fan outside of the 3,500 tickets that were allotted to Indiana, which we obviously know there will be more than that in the stadium. So yeah, I don't think there's like ill will towards Indiana fans. I think a lot of people know Indiana fans. And maybe there's some guys that are fans that like, maybe they're passively Indiana football fans, but now they're more actively Indiana football fans based on this season, which I don't blame fans for getting more engaged based on success. So I don't think it'll be nasty in the stadium between the fans, but certainly it could turn that way if Indiana has the upper hand on the field and Notre Dame fans don't like what's going on out there.
So speaking of that, like on the field, I'll ask you kind of a two-part question. What would you say is, if something is like if this is happening on the field, you think Notre Dame has a really good chance of winning? And then the flip side is, if you were seeing, what would you be seeing during the game that would really give you concern about Notre Dame having a chance to win? So like kind of the both sides of the coin, like what would you see that really makes you think like, man, if you see this in the first quarter, or the first half, it's like, dude, Indiana's going to have a rough night. And then the flip side of that as well.
Yeah, I think the two biggest things to me, and I think they go both ways for both teams, is who can run the football better. Like, particularly for Notre Dame, if it's not able to run the football, that raises questions of Notre Dame's sort of suspect passing game at times. And can Riley Leonard and Notre Dame's passing game find some success, even with or without the help of the running game? I think Notre Dame needs to run the ball regardless. I think Riley Leonard only has to make a handful of throws here or there to maybe loosen up the defense and allow some extra running room for Notre Dame's running backs or himself. And then turnovers, I think, is the other thing. Like, neither of these teams turn over the ball very much. Right. Their defenses do force a lot of turnovers. So how does that play out? Like, who makes the first turnover? Will that be a significant part in the outcome of the game? So like, to me, like, the biggest thing is if Notre Dame can't run the ball, like, that's the biggest concern for Notre Dame. And then I think if IU is able to run the ball, that just makes IU's offense so much more difficult to stop. And so that would be concerning from a Notre Dame defensive perspective. So if IU can run the ball, and then obviously whoever turns it over, obviously whoever turns it over more is going to have a harder time to win the game. And we'll see how that all plays out.
Yeah, no, you keep hitting the running game, which is true. Like, it's what I keep going back to, is that, statistically, Indiana's defense against the run is one of the best in the country.
Right.
And we always have to say, based on opponents, and like, but we're here. All you have is the stats to go off of. Our defense has been very good against the run, and definitely Notre Dame's offense is a run first offense, and that's where they get the majority of their offense and production. And so I love seeing those battles that are kind of head to head battles. Mm-hmm. For Indiana, I think the thing that the open question for us is, Curtis Rourke was great up until that injury against Nebraska. And then he hasn't quite been the same. I saw just, with my eyes, the ball looked better. Like, it was zipping and throwing better against Purdue. Now, obviously everything was open against Purdue. But the overall offense, like, it hasn't really gotten its mojo back since that, it was doing pretty well. And then like Michigan and Ohio State, it definitely hit a wall. The question is, like, was Purdue enough to get things figured out, or was it just Purdue sucks and that's just a blip on the road? I think that's a real open question for Indiana, is like, can they get their offense back to a point where, what made them special in my mind was their ability to just stack scoring drives after scoring drives and put real pressure on the other team. It's an open question whether they're going to be able to do that against Notre Dame.
Yeah, Notre Dame hasn't played from behind a lot in games. They're used to being ahead Maybe not to as wide of a degree as Indiana has been at times, but I mean, even thinking about Notre Dame's schedule, Notre Dame went out and scored 66 against Purdue, which was the week after Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois.
Right.
But then the following week after that, scored just 28 points against Miami of Ohio. So obviously, Purdue can maybe be a little bit misleading in terms of a healing effect. So we'll see like what that means for Indiana. I think Notre Dame's going to have a pretty good game plan defensively and try to pressure Curtis Rourke and limit his ability to expose the defense. But I think Notre Dame's going to have to make some decisions there. Like, okay, if you're worried about stopping the passing game, does that make you more vulnerable against the run? And then I think IU becomes really more dangerous, like I mentioned earlier, if the running game is clicking for the Hoosiers.
I'll ask you this question because I thought it was it ended up not being totally true because Indiana went up 7-0 at Ohio State. But I thought that if Indiana could continue that lead, I felt like there was going to be a lot of pressure on Ohio State because Ohio State, at that point, like they knew they had to play Michigan. They didn't know they were going to lose to Michigan. Like there's a world where if Ohio State loses to Indiana and Michigan, Ryan Day could have been fired just the next day.
Yeah.
It didn't end up. Indiana made a couple of mistakes. Ohio State really took control of that game. In this case, I obviously the players don't take anybody lightly. You're in the college football playoff. Everyone here is good. But I definitely think Indiana's coming in as the underdog. It's kind of the upstart story. Notre Dame's at home. Notre Dame is Notre Dame. If Indiana continues to have a lead, is there a world where all of the pressure moves over to Notre Dame if you're in the second half? And is that something that could happen? Or do you think that it's just not going to happen in that kind of way?
I think it definitely could happen. So Notre Dame, like I mentioned, Notre Dame hasn't trailed a lot, but it has given up first scores to opponents at a higher rate than you would expect for a really good defense. And I think sometimes Notre Dame's just not necessarily prepared for the different things that a team might come out that it hasn't done all season. And then quickly after that is able to course correct and come up with a defensive game plan and adjustments to limit what those teams are doing. So there could be a similar script to what that Ohio State game was, where maybe IU has a good first drive and then Notre Dame sort of locks in and slows things down. But then maybe IU keeps things going. That's sort of what happened with USC. USC in Notre Dame's final regular season game, the offense for USC was able to continue to find some success, and that wasn't something that Notre Dame was used to doing. But Notre Dame's offense kept having answers to not make that too uncomfortable. But then it was still close towards the end of the game, and Notre Dame clinched it with some pick sixes at the end that made it a little bit more lopsided than the game actually was. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the pressure aspect of it, like Notre Dame, even maybe not in-game pressure a lot, but Notre Dame's been pressured since losing to Northern Illinois, right? Like they could not lose again. Like if they wanted to make the college football playoff, they had to win each game. So the game pressure wasn't always there, but there were times even in some of the games that aren't the scoreboard doesn't necessarily dictate it, that it was like the result of the game was a little bit in question. Like it wouldn't be unreasonable to see the other team jump ahead and stay ahead. And Notre Dame was able to overcome that, whether that's against Virginia, whether that's against Georgia Tech, whether that's against Miami of Ohio and Louisville. Louisville was probably its most impressive victory early in the season because Louisville played its tail off. It made some mistakes earlier in the game that put it in a hole. But Louisville's offense was able to find some pretty good success by its quarterback and some receivers making some spectacular plays. And maybe that's something that Indiana can do here on Friday night.
So I've actually never been to Notre Dame Stadium. I've been to a lot of places. I'm going on Friday. I think there's a good number of Indiana fans who either haven't been before or haven't been in a couple of my friends haven't been in 20, 30 years. Again, there's just not a lot of outside of going to see Notre Dame. Obviously, Indiana's not playing there much. Mm-hmm. Speak to a little bit about the atmosphere of what we're going to find as fans, how it might affect the game, and the fact that it's a night game. Like I've been saying this for a while that there is something special about Notre Dame, and there's something special about a Notre Dame night game. I think back to, sorry to bring it up, but the Matt Leinart, push play when he was at USC. Yep. Like if you have great games and you have great moments and they happen at Notre Dame at night, it's kind of unique and can be a real special moment. But speak about the atmosphere a little bit, because I remember going into the Ohio State game, that was one thing. We had a couple people from Ohio State come on, And they were kind of pissed because they were like,
Yeah.
the noon atmosphere isn't the same as a night atmosphere. And it's just like, it's not going to be exactly the same, even though it was still a top 5 matchup. So I'm curious, just for people coming in, what to look for as a fan, what to enjoy, but also how a night game atmosphere may positively, negatively affect, how the game goes for Notre Dame or Indiana.
Yeah, I think there's something special about just being on campus. Notre Dame is a smaller campus, and like you don't have to travel that far on campus by foot to see sort of the sites that you're familiar with from TV. If you haven't been to Notre Dame before, you can see the Golden Dome, you can see Touchdown Jesus right looking over the stadium. And so I think it all sorts of adds, like the stadium itself, it's nicer now since it's been renovated, but it's just a pretty plain like bowl. Like there's not, it's not like unique in any sort of way with that, but obviously you can sort of sense the history and tradition there. And Notre Dame's done a good job while modernizing it and sort of making it still feel like Notre Dame Stadium. So yeah, I would encourage fans to sort of walk around before the game and take in those sites. And inside, I think night games, the atmosphere for night games has continued to improve. Notre Dame hasn't had at least I've been covering Notre Dame since 2012. Since then, not necessarily known for being an intimidating environment. I think back in the early 90s, when Notre Dame was really rolling, it was a different sort of deal. But Notre Dame does a lot in terms of its in-game presentation with music to try to get fans involved. Does some stuff between the third and fourth quarters with a light show and stuff to get things excited. So I expect it to be a really cool atmosphere. I expect Notre Dame fans to be very into it, especially being the night game. I think that leaves plenty of time to get liquored up. Notre Dame doesn't sell alcohol in the stands. Like there is access to it in like the premium seating areas, but the folks that are sitting in the regular seats, they're not able to buy alcohol in the stadium. So I think some of them do plenty of pre-gaming to prepare for that and maybe sneaking some in as well. But I expect the crowd to be full-throated and ready to go. And I sometimes it's people refer to the Notre Dame fans that sort of sit there and they call them the wine and cheese crowd. I don't expect, like, if you're going to this game, you're going to be willing to put yourself through the cold at night. Like, I feel like you're there for a reason. You're there to cheer for your team. And so I expect Notre Dame fans to be very supportive and loud and try to make a difference in the game.
All right. That sounds good. Before we get to kind of the end and, predictions or just thoughts on the game, I'll ask you this, because you mentioned, after the loss to Northern Illinois, it was a tight path. They had to win out. And, with Alabama not making it, I hate kind of the threats of like, well, we're done scheduling hard, because their schedule kind of sucked anyway. But, with conferences grow, this is a Notre Dame question every single time. And I know you're not in charge of this stuff, but I'm just curious your thoughts. As conferences get bigger, there's going to be less and less non-conference games and less opportunities for Notre Dame to schedule high-quality opponents. With the way that this 12-team playoff played out, seeing the advantages that the conference champions are getting, which is a whole nother conversation. It's like Boise State, knock yourself out, you get a bye. It's like they're going to change all that. But do you think, is this giving you more view of like, we got to stay independent, or do you view it as more like it would be better for Notre Dame to get into a conference and have an opportunity for one of the years, maybe you're a 2 or 3 loss team, to still get in the playoff? Because right now it does feel like the path is always going to be unbelievably razor thin for Notre Dame, kind of being the only one that doesn't have a conference affiliation.
Yeah, I think there is some concern there. And the concern from my perspective is like the willingness of the power conferences to continue to schedule Notre Dame.
Right.
Like, I think if those conferences really wanted to put the screws to Notre Dame, they just tell their teams to stop scheduling Notre Dame. Obviously the ACC relationship allows Notre Dame to fill half of its schedule. And then you sort of have ongoing rivalries with Navy, Stanford. Although I think there's maybe a little bit of question. There's no Stanford games scheduled at this point for next season. Right. With Stanford joining the ACC, I think there's some back and forth going about like whether or not Stanford counts as an ACC game for Notre Dame's contract with the ACC and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see. And obviously USC joined the Big Ten. So does USC get incentivized to not schedule Notre Dame moving forward? It's hard to imagine that because of how historic that rivalry is, but there's not that much that's sacred in college football anymore, unfortunately. So I think there is some concern there. I think as long as there's still a viable path to the playoff, and Notre Dame, Notre Dame's the 7 seed with one loss, and it's one of its worst losses ever.
Right.
Like that's not a terrible path, but yeah, I think one of the major concerns is like, well, Notre Dame can't get a bye, but also doesn't have to play in a conference championship game, so
Yeah.
it does get an extra week off. I think we're all still learning what that all looks like and means. I think it's too early to make any sort of bold statements about what this would look like long term, and we don't even know if this is going to be the playoff format moving forward past next season. So I think Notre Dame's going to have a voice and a role in determining where things continue to go as it relates to the playoff. But I wouldn't be shocked if down the line, like, it just becomes untenable for Notre Dame to put together a meaningful schedule on an annual basis that would make it reasonable for Notre Dame to get into the playoff with one loss or something like that.
I agree. And I think at this point, what Notre Dame has lost, from my perspective as an outsider, is the ability to have kind of a Clemson type season where you stub your toe and you're really kind of out of it, but you're able to, I don't want to say backdoor, but just find a way into the playoff. It feels like that's not going to be available to Notre Dame. It's also, the money aspect is just, I continue to be amazed at this, but it used to be, because Notre Dame had that exclusive TV contract, it really put them above and beyond a lot of other teams. At this point, I'm pretty sure that every Big Ten team and every SEC school is probably making more, if not double, what Notre Dame makes just off the NBC contract. So you're kind of getting to a point where the money, I'm not sure, like, Notre Dame could end up making more just coming into the Big Ten with a full share than what they get off the NBC contract.
Yeah, Notre Dame doesn't share the numbers with us, so we don't know exactly what they look like, but it's been expressed that Notre Dame is fine. Like, the gap is not that big, if there is much of a gap at all,
right,
between not just the NBC contract, but Notre Dame also gets money from the ACC media deal, as with all those games that it plays against the ACC team. So they're making up for it in different ways, and I think there is some institutional value to being independent. I think there are a lot of donors that really value that and continue to donate at a high level because of that. So I think there are decisions that have to be made continuously. Like the NBC contract, I don't believe it's as long term as it normally is, because I think that Notre Dame needs to have the flexibility to be able to sort of flex and continue to keep up with these power conferences, but specifically the Big Ten, the SEC, with what those conferences are able to do right now.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things that always continues to come up. The last thing I'll say, I don't talk to a lot of Notre Dame fans about this. I talk about Notre Dame a lot in respect to this, not like, people who cover the team. The piece that I would be concerned about if I was Notre Dame is, it does feel like there's going to be kind of one, again, we don't know, this continues to always change, but it feels like there's going to be another round of expansion. Like 20-20 seems like fair numbers for the for the Big Ten and the SEC. It feels like you get to 40. That's kind of a good round number. And if I was Notre Dame, my only concern would be is if that expansion happens and they're not a part of it, then it's like, have you now calcified yourself outside, and suddenly the train continues to move, and it's like you can't find a way into one of those two. And really, we've talked about this, is you have a lot of weird marriages of schools and conferences, but like Stanford doesn't really make sense in the ACC, nor does Berkeley, but there would not be a more unlikely marriage than Notre Dame and the SEC. Like, it's just the Notre Dame as a school could not be more diametrically opposed to everything the SEC is than that. So like I just continue to come back to, like, if the Big Ten just says, like, we got, we're getting North Carolina and Clemson, whatever, we're getting to 20, I'd be really concerned as a Notre Dame fan. I'm like, oh man, that's like, now we're losing our options out. I don't know. I'm just curious your thoughts on that. And then we can move off this and get to final thoughts on the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does seem unlikely that Notre Dame would join the SEC, but
yeah,
a lot of things seem unlikely that have happened, So, like, I think Notre Dame, it's sort of a game of chicken. Notre Dame would be like, okay, Big Ten, if you're going to make this move, like, we'll join the SEC, and then will the Big Ten call their bluff?
Right.
Would Notre Dame follow through on that? And then vice versa. Like, I think there is some leverage from Notre Dame's perspective. It's like, well, don't do anything crazy, because then we'll just join the other conference that you don't want us in, because we all know that both of those conferences want Notre Dame if they could have them.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like a big game of chicken to me. I don't know how it all play out, but Notre Dame's at least, or maybe it's like the classic office scene where they're all pointing finger guns at each other right now. That's what's going on right now.
Yeah, and in the end, it'll be money. Whatever the best money option will be there.
Yeah.
So we've kind of kicked all around it. I mean, it's always the most cliche. What's your prediction? But what do you think for the game? If you want to throw a prediction out there, you can, or how you think it's going to play out. Like what do you think we're going to see in 74 hours now on Friday night?
Yeah, I've been looking at a Notre Dame 28-7 victory or 28-17 victory.
Man, come on, man.
No, 17. Sorry. Misspoke. I expect it to be tight in the first half. I do think Notre Dame will pull away a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be like I don't think it'll ever feel like extremely comfortable for Notre Dame. Like I think it's going to be close throughout. Notre Dame's field goal kicker has been struggling, so I have a hard time putting a field goal into my score prediction for Notre Dame right now. So that's why I'm going with 28. And I think Notre Dame's going to be able to have some success offensively. I think its defense will probably force a timely turnover that'll help out its offense. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be lopsided. I think it'll be close, and I think Indiana will be able to move the ball, but I think maybe we'll have some trouble getting into the end zone at times.
I think that's all fair. I'm not sure where I'm going to land on the game. I think being a homer, I'm probably going to pick Indy. Although it's wild. I mean, we are beyond any rational thought. That it's like kind of like the spot in Ghostbusters where he's like, I'm beyond the capacity for rational thought. Like we are way past any expectation I ever had. The idea that I'm picking Indiana to win a road game in a college football playoff is like bananas. But I would just say that, the only game we struggled was against Ohio State. It wasn't awesome. But if you really take a positive view of that, it was a couple of miscues on special teams that really lost the game. And it's not like it was close, but if you change those, it wasn't also like a complete butt whooping. And this is no knock on Notre Dame or the stadium, but Notre Dame Stadium is not Ohio Stadium. It's 30,000 less people. Yeah. They've lost, I think, 3 games in the last 4 years at home. Ohio State hasn't done that in a decade. It's just two different kinds of places. So I think there's a reality where Indiana, if their offense comes in a little bit better, and Cignetti has shown every time the lights get bright, outside of that one Ohio State game, they've been able to respond and normally respond in a pretty good manner. So I think there's a real chance Indiana could win. But I think it's going to be a close game one way or the other. I would pick I'm on the fence. I would say I like Indiana +7 on the points where that line is right now. I like Indiana +7. I think that's a fair way to bet it. I have a real hard time saying Indiana's going to win, but it would not shock me, but it would definitely make me happy.
All right.
Well, hey, Tyler, I really appreciate you coming on. I hope you enjoy the game on Friday, and whichever of us goes, let's one of us beat Georgia. We can both agree. We got to rep the state of Indiana and take care of Georgia.
All right, sounds good. Enjoy the game as well.
All right, you too. So this is Tyler James from Inside Notre Dame Sports, and we'll have a couple more podcasts, I think, for you the rest of this week as we get ready for the game on Friday. I know Galen will be up there, a couple live events, so check out his Twitter, Crimson Cast, and I want to thank you all for listening. And as always, for Crimson Cast, this is Scott signing off.